If you have your lesson books, go ahead and turn to 1 Kings chapter 8. We're going to be in that area this morning. We're also going to be, our lesson this morning is just a continuation of what we've already been studying. If you remember last week, and the weeks prior to that, we've been studying about the ark, about the temple, about David, about God telling David through Nathan that he would not be the one that would build the ark. And I told you then, and I believe with all my heart, that when Nathan first came to David and told David that God was not going to allow him to build the ark, you notice what Nathan told David? He said, a son of yours will build the temple. Now, that's very important because I do not believe in my studies that at this point in David's life that he knew that Solomon would be the one to build it. He didn't know which one of the sons God was going to choose. Yes, Solomon was David's choice. We know that. But after David passed away, David had no knowledge of which child that God would put on his throne. But later on in David's life, we find that he does. And we find that there's even a rebellion in David's household. And David has to go flee and everything. Well, anyway, to make a long story short, we're going to continue today, and we're going to see where David has already passed away now and is going to be with his ancestors. And Solomon has now taken the throne. Solomon has built the temple. And you remember last week we studied about the dedication of the temple and them bringing the ark back. Well, today we're going to look at Solomon as he blesses and praises God and the congregation. But the writer brings out an interesting thing today in our lesson, and I want to mention it because it says, a young man was called Alex Sheen, was called to give a eulogy for his father at his funeral. Young man, and he said it, Sheen wanted to say something at the eulogy that would actually tell the life of his father. And he remembered that his father was one that always kept promises. When he made a promise, he always kept it. So Alex went ahead and made up little cards called the promise cards. And at the bottom of it, these cards was written on them, said, because he said he would. So Alex then takes these cards and he takes them and passes them out to each one at the funeral. And he asked each one of those people that took a card, he said, I want you to take a card. I want you to make a promise And whoever you make that promise to, I want you to hand that card to them. And when you have kept that promise, then they will give you the card back. Well, as I was reading this and thinking about it, I thought that was great in what he had done. But he said, here's it, in 18 months, Sheen had kept his promise and sent out more than 25,000 cards. Because he told these people at the funeral, if they wanted cards, to let him know and he'd send them. But he didn't realize how that was going to grow. It grew into an organization even today that you can go online and you can actually request these promise cards, and they will send you 6 to 10 free cards. If you want more, then you can purchase them. But as I was studying this, I've often thought, that's great. But how many times in our lives have we made a promise to somebody, but we didn't follow through with it? Well, today we're going to study how Jesus Christ, our God, is a promise-keeping God. God has never broken a covenant, has never went back on a promise that he has made to any of his people. But we're going to look today in our studies surrounding the dedication of the temple in Jerusalem. We will see why the fact of keeping a promise is so important. You know, as I said in our lesson background, talking about David, when Nathan told him that God had come appeared to him and told him that he would not be the one that built a temple, but his son, one of his sons would be the one. Well, God then enabled Solomon to complete the project for his dad. His father had given him the builder, the house, and we find that in 1 Chronicles chapter 22. But we learned last week and over the weeks prior to that David had did what? Even though his heart desire was to build a temple, he still didn't let that go undone. He went out and did what? He got timber, he got stone, he got materials, and he stockpiled these materials so that when whoever God put on the throne to build a temple, that they would have a good start in supplies. He stockpiled gold and silver and all the materials that went into the temple. But God told David that his son Solomon would be the one that would complete the project. We know this for a fact. The Lord, except the Lord build a house, they labor in vain that build it. We find that in Psalms 127. In other words, if God is not behind it, if God doesn't want it, then our labors are going to be in vain. Even in our work today, in our Christian life today, our walk with God has got to be the walk with God that God is satisfied with and wants us to take. We might start out in our walk with God and we might take this path. But God says, no, stop. I want you to go this way. We have to be willing in our life to see where God wants us to go and take that direction. And if God is with us, or with anybody, then that house will be built right. We look at then, with our lesson today, we're going to start out at 1 Kings, the 14th chapter. But before I get to the 14th verse, before I get into the 14th, chapter 8, verse 14, remember at the end of our lesson last week, here's a statement that was made. When Solomon was dedicating and had his prayer, this is what he said: I have indeed built a magnificent temple for you, a place for you to dwell forever. This is the statement that Solomon makes at the end of our lesson last week. Now we're going to pick up today in verse 14 in our lesson. And in our lesson in verse 14 we see that Solomon is standing on a platform. And he is facing the temple. And he is blessing or praising God for the temple. And you know, in last week it showed the glory of God that rose up from the temple. Well, what I want to do is this platform here that is made just special for this ceremony that he had for the dedication. That brazen platform was 5 feet wide, 5 feet long, and 3 feet high. Well, Solomon is standing on this, and he is praising God. Now, there's 2 words here that I want to utilize, and I want to show you that has the same Greek word in the Bible. And this is this. Here's what the temple he's looking at and he's praising God for. While the whole assembly of Israel was standing, now they were standing in a prayer, reverent respect. When they were standing there, the king turned around and he blesses them. Bless who? Bless the people. Well, that word blessed, okay, is the same word that is used for praise. The Greek word means to show a likeness to, okay? Or to acknowledge someone's abilities or acknowledge good works that someone has done. Well, we ask ourselves, why does the writer use blessed when it refers to the congregation? And when it talks about God, it says praise. Well, I believe that the writer is elevating, showing the acknowledgments of how all-powerful God is, by saying that they praise Him, versus when he said he blesses the congregation. And I believe here that Solomon is now standing on this platform right here. Standing on the platform. And now he's turned around from the temple. Now he's facing the congregation. And he's going to go ahead and bless the congregation. Now, what the Bible doesn't tell us what these blessings are. But if you go back to Deuteronomy, I think it's parallel a lot to the same blessing that Moses gave the people there at Mount Horeb. I think what Solomon is doing here in his blessing to this congregation is just like anything that you and I would do. Notice that Solomon has set certain men to be stone cutters, some to be carpenters, some to be masons. I think what Solomon is doing here after the dedication of this temple, he is blessing the congregation. He's blessing these people. He's telling them, he's showing them his acknowledgement that they have done a good job for God. And he's blessing them for that. He's pointing out to them that they, with the work of God behind them, is what built this temple. And he is blessing his people, his congregation for it. Then we see in verse 15, he says, then he said, praise be to the Lord. Now, the word praise, even though it's the same word as blessed in the Greek, I think the writer is elevating it to the point that he's showing that God is the all-powerful one. Even though it means that he's showing the same thing, saying the same thing in the Greek word, but it's elevating it to a higher level. Instead of saying, well, you did great, now he's telling them, God, you are the one that caused all of this greatness to be. And he's praising God for all the things that God has done for this dedication, for this the hands. And he says, who with his own hands hath fulfilled with what he promised with his own mouth to his father David. The writer here, I believe, is talking that when he praises God here, he's praising God for the fact that, listen, you kept your promise, God. You told my father that his son would be the one that would build a temple. You have chosen me to be that son. You have chosen me to be the one that built a temple. And he is acknowledging to God, Samuel is, that through his own hand, he fulfilled that promise by working with him, leading him in the direction he's supposed to go, and the people that he chose to help do the job. Solomon is praising God and acknowledging to God that the work that had been done to this temple came through him and nobody else. Then we see in verse 16, he says, for he said, since the day I brought my people Israel out of Egypt, I have not chosen a city in any tribe of Israel to have a temple built so that my name might be there. But I have chosen David to rule my people Israel. The writer is saying here that God, since the day that he brought his people out of Egypt, God gave them the architectural plan, Moses, to build a tabernacle. And he told him, I will give you the land of Canaan. I will divide that land. It will be given to each one of the 12 tribes their share. But he says, I have never told nobody or have never chosen a city because I was what? I was constantly moving. I never said I was going to take a tribe or a city in that area and build a temple there. I've never promised nobody this. He said the only promise I made was to David. That David would be the one that would have a what? A kingdom forever. And I chose David, and through David, I have chosen that my people Israel would have a place to worship. Now, there's two things here that I look at in my study. Even though that Jerusalem was in the area of Ephraim, but I think God's promise was that, as he said here, I've never said that I would want to have any tribe of Israel. David conquered Edom. Remember that? And he called that place Edom, he called it the city of David. And then from that point on, David then expanded the walls. And last week we said that he took what? And had bought the ground at Uriah's threshing floor, so that that would be the place where the temple could be built. God did not, now let me say this, God in his infinite wisdom did not tell David or anyone else, this is where I want my temple built. What did he say? He said, I have chosen David to be thy leader of all of my people Israel. He will choose where the temple will be built. That's what I think the writer is saying. Not that he's going to build it, but through his dedication and through his planning and everything, God allowed David to choose Mount Moriah. And I don't think that's any accident either, I'll be honest with you. I do not believe that's an accident. Because if you go back and you look at the history of Mount Moriah, that's where supposedly Abraham was supposed to have made the sacrifice of Isaac. If you go back and you go forward into our time and our history, Mount Moriah in that area, Golgotha, that's where Jesus Christ was crucified. So why wouldn't it be a place that would please God? A place where people come to worship. His people. God didn't decide that that would be the place. He let David do that through David's wisdom. But God was behind David. He was directing David in every way, in every path. So I think when he said, I've chosen that, and in verse 17, the writer says this, Solomon does, my father David now had it in his heart to build a temple for the name of the Lord, the God of Israel. David in his blessings, as he's blessing the congregation, is telling the congregation as he looks forward, and I believe he's down on his knees on that platform and his hands up, and he's talking to the people there, and he said, listen, he said, God had it in his heart for David to build this temple. Now, he's not saying that David himself is going to build it, but the regime of David's inheritance would be the one that would build the temple. My father David had it in his heart. He desired to do it. David wanted to do it. And David actually thought, I believe in his heart, that he was going to be able to build that temple. Until when? Because he even went to Nathan. Remember in our lesson when he went to Nathan and he asked Nathan? He said, Nathan, look at all of my things that I have accomplished. Look at my palace. Look how magnificent it is. Look at this city that we have. And then look over here at this little measly tent that I have built for my God to house the ark. David was shameful. He had a shameful heart. Because here he had all this stuff, but yet the ark, God's ark, and the place of worship had not been established yet. David burned in his heart the desire to build this temple for the Lord. But yet, Nathan told him, David, do whatever you want. Whatever's on your heart, do it. But there's one thing that Nathan and David both didn't do. They didn't reach out to God to ask God what his plans was. A lot of times we as Christians do the same thing in our walk. We try to get ahead of God. We will do things in our life that we think it's all right with God, but yet it's not. And I have said this, and I have tried to do this in my, and I wasn't this way when I was younger, I'll be honest with you. When I was younger in my Christian life, a lot of times I would sit out to try to do things on my own and not even give any thought to God. But in my life today, no matter what decision I want to make, what plan I have or anything, no matter how small or how large it might be, I go to God. And I ask God, I said, I want your direction. I want you to lead me. And this is what David respected. He respected what Nathan has said, and he respected God enough to know that even though he wasn't the man that's going to build the temple, at least he could prepare materials for whoever did. And then we see in verse 18, he said, but the Lord said to my father, as Solomon addresses the congregation, he said, the Lord told my father, you did well to have this in your heart, to build a temple for my name. Solomon acknowledges to the congregation now that God himself thought it well of David because David wanted to build a temple. But he goes on and says, nevertheless, you are not the one to build the temple, but your son. Now notice right here, the writer doesn't say, Solomon doesn't. He just says, your son. Now why? Let's stop right there. What was the custom at that time of any king or any empire? The custom was what? The eldest son would be the one that would take over, wasn't it? And if you find out all through, even after Solomon, all the other kings, as we go through, down through time, we see that the eldest son is usually the one that's chosen. Well, it says here, as Solomon addresses the king, he said, nevertheless, you are not the one to build a temple, but your son. God told him that it's going to be your son. Your own flesh and blood. He is the one who will build the temple for my name. Now, I'm only speaking for myself. I do not believe that at the time that the writer was writing this 1 Kings, this particular verse, that it had ever been made known by David or anybody else that Solomon would be the son to be chosen. I think that came upon at the time of David's death. Now, it says here in verse 20, the Lord has kept the promise he made. Now notice what he says. The Lord made a promise, didn't he? He made a promise that David's son would do what? Build a temple. He didn't say which son, but he promised he kept, because who did it? Solomon, the son of who? Bathsheba and David, was the one that God had chosen to build that temple. I have succeeded David, he said, Solomon did. I have succeeded my father, and now I sit on the throne of Israel, just as the Lord has promised. And I have built the temple for the name of the Lord, the God of Israel. Solomon is telling the congregation, I have built this temple through all the promises that God has made. God said it would be through David's son. I am David's son. But I think also this could be taken also that when he said, I have built, that he is referring to the congregation, that I think he's saying it, we together, with God's planning, with God's direction, and God's blessings, we together have built this magnificent temple for the Lord. Then we see then in verse 21, I have provided a place there for the ark, in which is the covenant of the Lord that he made with our ancestors when he brought them out of Egypt. Notice this one verse here. He said, I have provided a place there for the ark, in which is the covenant of the Lord that he made with our ancestors when he was brought out of Egypt. This promise, this verse here goes clear back to Mount Horeb. When Moses came down off the mountain, remember when he came down off the mountain with the tablets? And he'd seen the people with the golden calf and everything? He gets angry and breaks it. What did he do? He's got to go back up on the mountain another 40 days, doesn't he? He says, well, that covenant he made, that ark was to what? To house what? The tablets, the commandments. But it also goes a little bit deeper. It says everywhere that tabernacle went, that God's glory, if it was where he wanted it, God's presence would be made known to his people, because he would do what? Cover the ark. Cover the covenant that he made. He was a covenant covering. In other words, that covenant that he made with his people, when he showed himself present to them in the form of a smoke or the fire, he was letting his people know, I am a covenant maker, and I will keep that covenant. And they knew as long as that cloud was there, as long as the presence of God was there with the ark and the tabernacle, that they were pleasing God and doing what God wanted. They didn't please God all the time, and we know that. We see that constantly all through Exodus, don't we? But God made a promise to who? Abraham, didn't he? He made it to Moses. If you remember, even at one time, to show you how angry God got, God wanted to wipe Israel completely off the map at Kadesh, because they refused to what? To go into the promised land. Well, we know this. God is a faithful God. And I want to look at this. Precious promises. Now, I don't know you, what you think, but I want to ask you, you don't have to tell me out loud, but in your own mind, just think. If you had to pick one of these out as being the most important to you, which one would it be? One, God protects his people. 2, believers receive eternal life. 3, Jesus is preparing our eternal home. 4, all things work for the good of those who love God. 5, he gives wisdom to those who ask for it. And in Revelation 21:4, someday all sorrow and tears will cease. All of those are promises that none of us want to give up. But in my opinion, if I only had one to choose, the one that I would want to choose would be this: believers will have eternal life. In other words, as long as I obey and I believe in the Father, I'm going to have eternal life. Job, at times, if you study the book of Job, Job was straddled a fence at times. He didn't know whether or not that he would be resurrected or not at times. He didn't know whether he'd be left in the grave and just rot. But he had what? He had faith. He believed that one day that God would open that grave and he would resurrect it. Well, we all, through our obedience, want to have eternal life. And to sum our lesson up today, if God has promised it, God will do it, or God will keep it. So, I want to leave you with this. If you make a promise, do everything in your power to keep that promise. Because God does. And we are what? To be like God, aren't we? We are to walk and prepare and to develop our lives as much after God as we possibly can. If God is a loving God, if God is a promise keeper, then he expects his people to be also. Thank you so much.